This is Ryan Clarenbull. Oh. This is Ryan Clarenbull interviewing Mary O'Connor. The date is June 10th. It is 9:15. All right, Mary, why do you want to share your story?
Well, I think I'm a big history buff, and I think it's important for posterity, for people to share their stories and know what happened before them, and so they have a better idea of why things are the way they are now.
Excellent. And when and where were you born?
I was born in South Bend, Indiana in June of 1951, but it was 3 weeks after my dad graduated from Notre Dame.
And tell me about your parents or grandparents.
My parents are both very Irish. My mother's name was Kitty Ryan, and my dad was Ray O'Connor. They grew up in Rockford, Illinois, where their families had lived. They all came to the States, to Illinois, in the mid-1800s, and they just stayed there for over 100 years. But my dad joined the Navy in 1944, right shortly as soon as he turned 18, actually. War was still going on, and so he was in for 2 years, and then he got out and went to college on the GI Bill, which I remember asking him one time if he thought he ever would have gone if he didn't have that. No, I mean, it made it possible for him, and Notre Dame had always been his dream, and so he went to college there, and they got married, and he had met my mother in high school. They both went to separate Catholic girls and boys high schools in Rockford, and they got married in 1950, and Mom moved to South Bend with him then, and I was born right after Dad graduated in 51. So she was a stay-at-home mom the whole time I was growing up. Very, very active in her community, though. Knew tons of people. And Dad was an accountant, actually. So after he graduated, then we moved to Milwaukee. So I only lived in South Bend for like a month or something, and he took a job with Arthur Anderson, which at the time was one of the big three accounting firms in Milwaukee. And then we moved several times after that because he changed jobs several times, and they ended up in Oshkosh, Wisconsin in the late 60s, and that's where I graduated from high school. I changed schools, moved in the middle of school, in the middle of 6th grade, right after I finished 8th grade, in the middle of my junior year in high school. And then they stayed in Oshkosh after that. So I had a lot of moving around when I was growing up.
During that time, do you have any influential extended family members at all that you kept in touch with?
I have a cousin who's, I was looking at this question, he is a Hollywood producer, actually. His name's Sean Ryan. He produced The Shield. I don't know if you ever saw that show. And now, I think the only show he is on right now is SWAT, and he produced Timeless, the one about the time machine.
Yeah.
And all the historical stuff, which was really interesting. So, yeah, he's the son of my mother's youngest brother. So he's our claim to fame. Yeah.
And do you have any formative personal experiences?
I think the moving was a huge, I mean, when you're 11 and a half and drop down in the middle of a school year in a town with a bunch of kids you know nothing about, it's a big change,
Yeah.
And it happened 3 times. So it was really hard, but I think it also, and it affects different people different ways. But for me, I always got to know that after a year or so, I'd, start feeling comfortable and would have made more friends. And so I think it made it easier for me to deal with new experiences, I guess I would say.
How old again were you the last time you moved?
I was 16 and a half.
Okay. Wow, yeah.
Middle of my junior year of high school.
Okay.
Yeah. With all these people who'd known each other for 12 years,
Right.
It was a small, we were always in Catholic schools. It was a small Catholic high school. And, but some of those people that I met in Oshkosh are still some of my closest friends. So I think it also, for me, made me realize how important it is to keep up with friendships, because you could just lose those people. And I suppose maybe it was just a part of keeping my history or something intact, but it's always been important for me to keep up with people I've met along the way.
Okay. Family interests that you did growing up or personal hobbies that you have now?
I guess my family's kind of different in that I have a brother who's a year younger than I am, and then my next brother is 9 years younger than I am. So I have Mike is just a year younger, Kevin's 9 years younger, then we have Dan who's 11 years younger, and Sheila's 13 years younger. So it's kind of like two families when I was growing up. So we did different things. I mean, they had a totally different experience in terms of the moving. The last time my parents moved, Kevin was 6 or 7 or whatever, you know, so they had a whole different experience. So we didn't do a lot of traveling or anything when I was growing up, although my parents later, and with the younger part of the family, did a lot of big camping trips and that kind of thing. But we were a very close family, and we were very close to the relatives in Rockford. We'd go visit them and that kind of thing. And my folks were real involved with the community. But I guess for myself, it was kind of your idyllic 50s childhood, except for the moving. You know, we'd eat breakfast and jump on our bikes and be gone till lunch, and then we'd go out again and, you know, hanging out with all the neighborhood kids. And it's very different from what kids can do today, I think, or what parents feel comfortable with kids doing.
Right.
And every minute of our lives wasn't organized. And
Right.
but I've always been a big reader. I was just, that's always been my main form of entertainment. I mean, I remember back when I was in 4th grade, we would ride our bikes to the library every Saturday morning, and I would check out 4 books, and I would have them all read by Sunday night, and then I'd have a really bad headache too. And I just have always, you know, I was one of those kids who had a flashlight in bed, you know, under the covers, and you're supposed to be sleeping. I was reading and that kind of thing.
What was your favorite childhood book?
I don't know if you even remember these, but they had a whole series of little orange covered biographies of famous people.
No, I don't remember those.
I think there's something similar now, but I'm not sure if it's the exact same publishing company, just updated. A lot of it focused on the childhood and the growing up of these famous people, and then the last chapter or two would be what they accomplished.
Did you enjoy like presidents more, or really anyone?
I've always had a big thing about presidents, yeah. That's still the president that I always remember, and this is so nerdy, but I still have it, when I was, and I think I got it in 1961 maybe. I think the whole John F. Kennedy running for president in 1960 was a huge deal, especially if you were Catholic.
Sure.
It was just a really big deal. And that's when I got really interested in all the historical, you know, even more. And I got my parents gave me for Christmas this book that was, you know, like 15 pages on each president, like the lives of the presidents. It was just the coolest thing. I just spent hours, you know, I could recite them all in order, you know, it's just, and even now that Bob and I are retired, that's one of the things we do is travel around to presidential historic sites, so. It's kind of where that came from. But that also spurred my interest in politics. Mm-hmm. So I've always been very interested in politics and history. And
okay.
I remember working when we lived in Watertown for a while, working on Bob Kastenmeyer's campaign for the House of Representatives. He was a very well-known representative from Wisconsin, which it was the 2nd district, so it's the same thing that Mark Pocan is now. I'm pretty sure it was the 2nd district. Anyway, that was in the mid-60s, you know, working at his headquarters on Main Street, and I was 13 or whatever, wow. You know, so, yeah.
Any influential school experiences besides probably, I would assume, kind of moving, but while you were there for a while, was there anything that was influential? Any maybe teachers or projects? Or
a lot of nuns, yeah. I went to a very good high school in Rockford, Illinois. Super academic, the Catholic high school there, and then I also went to the same school in Rockford. I guess they're in Oshkosh. That was just very challenging. In terms of school experiences, though, my freshman year of college, I went to St. Norbert's in De Pere, and then I transferred to UW-Madison, which was in the middle of the previous spring. The whole campus had been shut down for months with a TA strike, and the National Guard was here, and it was the whole middle of the Vietnam War, and so that whole experience, that whole getting very involved in what was going on politically and, you know, just in the country, you know, that was that probably had a lasting influence on me.
Were you on campus when wasn't there an explosion?
Sterling Hall
Yeah.
bombing. That happened 3 weeks before I moved here.
Okay.
And I lived in a dorm my freshman year. That happened in August of 1970, and I started here in September. But back then, UW started in the third week of September. And my mother told me later, I was in the Lakeshore dorms, and she said we drove past that building, and it was this blown up campus building. I mean, sitting over on Charter Street, and she said all I could think is, what are we letting her get into here? But they never said a thing. I give them a lot of credit. I don't know if I would have let my kid come here with all that going on
Right.
after sheltered St. Norbert's. But yeah, I started, and there was a lot more demonstrations going on that year, and it was the whole campus was really political. And so I'm not saying I was out there leading demonstrations,
Right.
but it was just fascinating to me how it was all happening.
Okay.
And then Watergate came right after I graduated, and I watched that for hours every night. And
Did you actually watch the?
oh yeah, I watched the hearings every night. Yep, PBS had them on every night, and
Wow.
it was fascinating. It was fascinating.
Kind of jumping ahead, when did you come to Monona?
1980. I came. We got married. Bob and I got married in '78, and by then he had just finished he went to library school then, right after we finished. I was working at the Extension Library, but I didn't have a degree at that point, a library degree. My degree was in history. As was Bob's degree. But he was working out here, and we decided to buy a house, and frankly, we really liked Monona. We had no idea about the east side at all. We were used to the campus area. But there were nicer, bigger yards here, and he had been working on the far east side, so was riding through here a lot on his bike, and frankly, the taxes were half of Madison's at that point. I shouldn't even put that on a tape, given what developed later. But that was part of the attraction. And so we spent the entire summer. Back in those days, you couldn't, of course, look up anything on the computer. They had these giant MLS listings of all the books all the homes that all the real estate agents were dealing with for sale. And I think a new version came out like every other week or something. And somehow we got a hold of one of those, and we spent every night just driving around the east side looking at houses. And we went through I think I counted, it was 21 houses with a real estate agent. I later asked her what was the average for people, and she said 3. She really earned her commission with us. Anyway, but we found our house on Winnequa Road, and at the time had no idea. We knew Monona was a separate city, but had no idea. We didn't know anybody from Monona. We didn't know anything about it, and it turned out that we bought in a great neighborhood with a great location, and especially once we had kids, we discovered that, and so it was kind of all pure luck, I'd say.
Yeah.
So.
And can you say more about your neighborhood, and has it changed at all since you've moved, and if so, how?
Well, of course, we've been there 39 years now, so we live we're right off the corner of Nichols, and just south of the corner of Nichols and Winnequa Road, and Arrowhead Park is right behind our house. At the time we moved there, I think there were 2 or 3 families with kids, and they were all in high school. A lot of the people in that neighborhood had built their homes, but it was just the point where their kids had grown up and were leaving or just about to finish high school. So it really turned over in the first 5 or 6 years that we were there, and there got to be a lot of people with kids our age moving in, and we all hung out at Arrowhead Park. It was we had most summer holidays, we'd always have big potluck picnics there, and that's, for quite a while, that's where the school bus stopped to drop kids off. So there'd be people waiting there for their kids, and we'd have happy hour there, and just, that was kind of just the neighborhood. It was our park. I mean, when kids that our kids didn't know showed up there, it was kind of like, what are they doing in our park, And we got some money. One of our neighbors worked at Anchor Bank, and he got some funding from them to help to buy some new equipment, because the equipment literally had been there since that park which was a neighborhood build, I later found out, back in the 40s. It was just ancient stuff, and we bought some new equipment, and then we all got together and painted what was left. I mean, so it was really kind of like our living room, I guess. But we really got to know a lot of neighbors. There are probably about 8 to 10 families who we are still friends with. All those people. Now everybody's kids are growing up and we're going to their weddings and that kind of thing. And now now the neighborhood's turning over. It's getting quite a few, several people have moved. They've either moved downtown or into something smaller or whatever. And so now we're seeing a lot of younger families again. But I think those things just come in waves.
Well, it was similar to when you came, right?
Right.
You came as kind of like the newer, younger family, and
yeah, we were sort of the start of it, and then it went through that whole process and changeover, and now, but there's people across the street from me who sold within the last 5 years who had built their homes in the 60s and we're still there.
Wow.
So, and that's still the case with some people on the street behind us too. So yeah, people come to Monona and they stay.
Yeah.
That's for sure. So it's been a great neighborhood, and of course we're only a block from the pool and the park and the library, and my kids were at the pool. I worked the whole time they were growing up, but they were at the pool every night, and they were always in home daycare situations and were there during the day in the summer, and our life kind of revolved around Winnebago Park and Arrowhead Park, I guess, and the library.
In terms of neighborhood changing, have you noticed even something like the trees? So like one thing that I see is Monona has, is abundant with mature trees.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, was that like that when you moved as well?
Yeah, in fact, that was one of the attractions for us. Was we've got 3 or 4 great big oak trees on our property, and it's lovely. It's so shady. Of course, part of the problem is we always had a problem growing vegetables of any sort, just finding a place to sun. But yeah, that was a big attraction for us, and of course we didn't think about what was involved in raking all those leaves in the fall. But yeah, I mean, they've just gotten bigger. In fact, we have an oak in our side yard that started as a little seedling that blew in there, and it's way over the house. I'm surprised at how tall it is. I know oaks aren't the fastest growing trees, but it's a great, big, huge, lovely oak tree now. So that's been fun.
38 years, right?
Yeah, I guess that'll do it. Yeah.
What does your family enjoy doing together? Or, when the kids were home, what did your family enjoy doing together besides going to the parks?
Yeah. Well, we have 2 daughters, and they are 8 years apart. So it was kind of like what one enjoyed, the other thought was boring, that kind of thing. So I guess the one thing we most years would take a big family vacation. We did a lot of camping. We went west a lot. We've got friends in Montana, and we've been all over the country camping with both girls. We jointly own a tent camper with 2 of my brothers, and so sometimes we would use that. So I guess I would say travel for the most part, and then just regular family life. Bob and I were always very involved in any activities the girls were into. So Claire in particular, our oldest, played softball. So he was, and Lauren played some softball too. So he was a volunteer parent coach in the summer or whatever. And I was a Girl Scout leader for both girls. I was a Girl Scout leader for 14 or 15 years altogether. Yeah, that was interesting. So I guess a lot of it was just being involved in their activities, but a lot of family time, and we're both, Bob and I are both close to both of our families. So everybody gets along. We really enjoy spending time with them. So we quite frequently would get together with both sides. None of them actually lived in the Madison area except for one of Bob's sisters, but so yeah, that and the traveling, I guess, was the big thing, and just a lot of talking.
And what Monona festivals and events do you attend, and why?
Well, I guess we always go to the 4th of July festival because it's right in our living room, practically. You can hear. We're a block away, so it's very obvious that it's going on. But that was always a high point of the summer, was the kids would decorate their bikes and be in the parade, and we'd always, quite often, would have gatherings at our house of friends to come over to watch, for a cookout or whatever, to watch the fireworks. Or for years we've sat with neighbors over by what the kids call the Blue Park, part of the park to watch the fireworks. So yeah, that and the art fair. We'd always go to the Taste of Monona. There was always the beer tent the night before the 4th. Was always a big deal, and we'd always see a lot of people we knew. So I guess it's primarily that one. The festival in the fall has just gotten to be a big deal, I'd say, in the last 10 years. There's always a chili cook-off, but that was always down at one of the hotels down on Monona Drive, so it wasn't quite as obvious when it was happening. But yeah, we usually get over to the fall festival. I've worked that a couple different times, the family part of it on Sundays. Guess I'm trying to think. There's always the parade. Of course, now I'm really involved in the parade, but we would always go to the Monona Memorial Day Parade, and one of our neighbors owned a business up on the corner of Nichols and Monona Drive, so all the neighborhood would go up there and sit in his parking lot and, watch the parade there. And then, of course, as we got older, our kids were in the band and whatever, show choir and all that kind of thing, so the Girl Scouts were all marching in the parade, and so that was always a big, kind of the kickoff of the summer. Trying to think if there are any other festivals. Well, it's not a festival, but the Friends of the Library book sale. I was a founding member of the Friends, as was Bob, and so we've always worked at that book sale. I mean, that's been going on for close to 40 years. Spending time sorting the week before, and then actually working the day of the sale and packing it all up, and that was always a big event. So yeah, I don't know. Are there any other festivals you can think of? I'm trying to think.
Not off the top of my head, but we have quite a few for a smaller community, but they're all great, and they're all very busy and well attended. It was interesting hearing that the fall festivals really become bigger in the last 10 years versus the 4th of July one, I assume, has been
right.
all those years.
That's been, 4th of July's been going on ever since we moved here.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the fall festival, there really wasn't a fall festival. There were some different events, and then long involved story, but the city appointed an ad hoc family attraction committee. This would have been probably 10, 12 years ago, to try to attract younger families to Monona. And the fall festival, I think, initially was an outgrowth of that committee. They wanted it was just on Sunday, and it was a festival to attract, specifically geared to families and younger kids. But then it expanded, and at that time they, I can't remember if it's the Monona Grove businessmen who sponsored the chili cook-off, and Jake Anderson, our park director, talked to them about possibly moving their chili cook-off up here, and then I think there's an art sale over there, and then for a while the Friends were doing their book sale that weekend, so it got to be a whole weekend. It's just continued to expand.
Okay. Do you recall any festivals or events that maybe the community tried for a couple of years but just didn't really take off?
Boy.
Any winter, have there ever been winter festivals?
There used to be a winter, I don't know if you call it a festival, but there was a winter week, at least a Saturday, and a lot of it was at the schools. I forgot about that. When my kids were growing up, they had a lot of activities for kids, and there was outdoor stuff, but I remember there was different booths and things in the gym at Winnequa, and I don't know who, what precipitated that, if that was something that the school district was sponsoring. I kind of doubt it. I'm assuming it was the city, but that probably would have been back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Okay.
I guess. I kind of forgot about that, but yeah, that seemed to, after a while, just kind of died a natural death. But I think they had ice skating. Of course, it's always so hard to plan with the weather.
Sure.
You never know if you're gonna. I remember the Dean House for years offered sleigh rides through the golf course, but then it got so, it seemed like every other year the snow wasn't deep enough, or there was no snow, or it was 35 below with a wind chill of minus 70 or whatever, and so I know they haven't done those in quite a while.
Okay.
But those were I think those were a big hit
for
a while. So
so can you please share what volunteer experience you've had with the Monona community?
Well, I've had a lot of volunteer experience, and I think that's a really good thing about Monona, that it's small enough that you can really get involved if you want to. So I started out, I guess, with the Friends of the Library, where some of this I'm sure people have heard if they went to the Story Jam, but shortly after we moved here, Bob was at the library and saw a sign about a meeting they were having to organize a friends group, and we decided to go since we were both interested in libraries. We're both huge readers, and decided that'd be a good thing to get involved with, and we went, and a month later he was the president and I was the treasurer, and it kind of went from there. And some of the people I know the best in Monona are people I met at that initial meeting, and they're still involved in the Friends. You know, it's been quite an amazing group. It's almost 40 years old, and they've raised thousands and thousands of dollars for the library. But it started there, and then Claire got involved in the Girl Scouts, and they were looking for someone to chair just the troop part of their cookie sale, so I volunteered to do that, and then the woman who was her troop leader, who was a friend of mine, decided to go back and get her college degree, so she wasn't going to be able to lead, and then I decided to volunteer to be a Girl Scout leader, and ended up being the leader for Claire's troop through 8th grade. And then when Lauren started, and of course she'd seen everything Claire's troop did, so thought she should do that too. And a friend of mine, Mary Posina, and I decided she had a daughter the same age as Lauren did, and we decided to start a troop, and we were their troop leaders from kindergarten through 8th grade when the whole thing kind of disbanded. So yeah, it was a lot of, I think people don't realize how much time these troop leaders put in planning these meetings. I mean, it really takes up a lot of time, and there's all kinds of regulations you have to follow with the Girl Scouts, and permission slips that parents don't return, and all this kind of stuff, you know. But Monona at the time had a very active Girl Scout group of troops, and we had another woman who kind of was in charge of all the troops, Pat Coyne, who's someone else you should interview. And she's still involved with the Girl Scouts, but they would plan these big weekend campouts at various places, sometimes in the spring and the fall. I mean, those were always kind of a highlight, and I think it's one of the things that kept the kids interested too. I mean, we worked on badges while we were at these places, but we did a lot of other things too. In the Madison Black Hawk Council, which was the covered Madison area, they own some really nice properties, which I've later come to learn is pretty unusual. Most councils don't own that kind of property, so we would always camp at those places. Or there's a 4-H camp we went to. There's an Easter Seals camp up in the Dells that we went to. I mean, and it was with other troops from Monona, so there are always, 100 girls and a whole bunch of parents, and you got to know all those people and plan all the meals and all that kind of stuff. And so those are always fun. So yeah, our life was run by the Girl Scouts for quite a while. And then along the way, I also became the co-chair of the cookie sale for the whole, I think Rainbow Ridge was the name of our group of 15 or 18 troops. It included IHM troops and so I think some from the east side of Madison. But our house was Cookie Central for one day of every March, and there's still a bunch of women I know who I refer to as the cookie moms. How do you know her? Well, she was a cookie mom, Those were the individual moms who were the true cookie people. So we did that. Yeah, so Girl Scouts was a huge thing. And I also, shortly after the Friends started, a couple years later, Bob was asked to be on the library board, and he was on for 14 or 15 years, and then he decided to step down, and then I was asked to take his spot, so I was on for another 14 or 15 years. I think altogether the two of us were on library board for 29 years or something like that. So I had a lot of Girl Scout or library board things going on too, and about 3 or 4 years after I joined the board, I became the president of the board, and that's when we decided we were doing actually some strategic planning, and everything we wanted to do illustrated the fact that we had no space here. So we ultimately decided we needed to add on to the library, and that kind of took over my life for 2 or 3 years. Excuse me, we had to we went to referendum. It was an advisory referendum to get approval of the community for the project, because it was about $3.5 million. And 70% approval, which is pretty great, I think. I think Monona's always been a great supporter of the library. But then there was the whole, the city council getting their approval, and they had to borrow the money, and the Friends agreed to help raise $500,000 for it, and I think we eventually raised, I don't know, $700,000 or something like that. So the whole fundraising thing was a huge deal. So I was very involved in the campaign to pass the referendum, and that's when I really started to get some experience in politics, other than when I was 12. But how to run a campaign, and that kind of thing. And then we had all these committees for the building, a building committee. There were just various committees involved with this whole project, and I, by then, was president of the library board, so I was on all those committees. So that was spent a lot of time working on this, the edition that we're sitting in now, and I think it's been a great addition to the library, literally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that I think we had the grand opening maybe in 2002. I can't remember, somewhere around there.
Was that process, since you mentioned the addition, just curious, was that process, did it go as planned? I mean, obviously successful to get the addition, a lot of community support. Was that whole process itself, since this sounds like it was your first entry into this kind of thing, did it go as you thought it would? Or were there surprises along the way that you learned?
I think for the most part it did. We had a lot of community members involved in it. There was Paul Ament, who worked for, we worked for an architectural firm in town, I can't think of it. He was kind of our volunteer sort of project, not manager, but he really kept a close eye on expenses. He saved us a lot of money, suggesting different ways to do things and that kind of thing. John DeBacher was the library director at that time, and he was terrific. I've often thought that probably half the reason that the project got such support is because John was so well known in the community and so well liked. So yeah, I mean, there were always weird stuff that turned up as they were building, but that always happens. So I think, overall, but it was a process. I mean, before we even got to the referendum, the mayor appointed a study committee, an ad hoc committee to determine a site, and I was on that committee. And we looked at all kinds of sites. At that time, the old Eagle food store was down where, I can't think of the name of the development on the corner of Frostwoods and Monona Drive. It had been, I think it was Eagle, then it turned into Kohl's, and that property was empty. There was even talk about moving into that store. But there were a lot of issues where that wasn't good. Plus, it wasn't very centrally located, and people just wanted to keep the library here. It became very clear that nobody wanted to move the library to a different site. So yeah, it was a whole process, and I guess for what little I knew going into it, it went as I thought it would. But there were a lot of steps involved.
I'm sure.
In what we did, yeah. So it was a great day when it opened. It was we were all very happy to see it come to fruition, and then I stayed on the library board for till I was elected to the city council in 2012. But I stepped down from the being president. Well, then we went through 3 different library director changes, so I led the committee for all those, so that was quite an interesting process. But I stepped down from being president in 2007, I think, maybe. That's when Lauren went to high school and got into the show choir, and that took over the next 4 years of my life. I guess she started in 2006, and I was asked to be the vice chair of the MG Sings, which is the choir parent booster group, which is very active. It's not just involving going to a couple concerts. So I was vice president of that for 2 years, and then became president when she was a junior. And but then, they had a big fruit sale in the fall, which we ran, but the big thing was this show choir competition that MG sponsors every year, and they literally bring in thousands of people to the high school. They'll bring in 20 show choirs from all over the Midwest, in this day-long competition, and their bands and all their parents, and it's just it's a huge event, and it's all run by volunteers for the most part. And so chairing that just absorbed my life for months and months and months and months. I think we had 15 to 20 committees, because we provide food, and everybody was assigned a classroom as a homeroom, and I mean, you had to have places for people to warm up and get dressed, because they all come in these fancy costumes, and it's just people to build a stage, and it was just a huge event, but it was really fun to work on too. And then once that was done, then I essentially became the organizer of all the volunteers for the MG musical, which is also a huge deal. One year they did, Dr. Seussical. Yeah, and we had all these grade school kids in it too. So I think the cast was like 50, so that was coordinating a whole bunch of committees too, and yeah, so it was really fun. It was a good time and a good way to spend time with your kid, Unfortunately, my kids didn't mind that I was there. I had friends whose kids wouldn't even let them set foot in the high school, so yeah, so I guess that's the main volunteer stuff. I was still involved with the Friends a lot, though I was also gotten involved in some political campaigns. For years I coordinated all the literature distribution for Monona, probably from the more progressive side of things, I guess, but for people running for city council or school board or different referendums, that kind of thing. So organization thing kind of is a trend in my life, I guess, and I guess that's why I am a librarian. I went back, eventually got my master's in library science in the late 80s, and that's probably part of the reason why. Besides loving books, I love to organize stuff. Yeah. That's what you do when you're a librarian.
That's right.
So yeah, that was my volunteer. Trying to think. Then once Lauren finished high school in 2009, I was asked to join the board of the Monona Grove Education Foundation. So I've been their secretary probably for 10 years now, and I'm the person who coordinates the alumni newsletter that goes out to, 10 or 11,000 MG alumni twice a year. Even though I never went to Monona Grove, but.
Has there ever been a board or committee that you've said no to?
Well, that's kind of a problem. I'm trying to think if there was one, but there may not have been. Yeah, you have to learn to say no. I think there have been one or two things. I can't think of them off the top of my head right now. But yeah, there are only so many hours of the day, and I've always worked through all this too. So yeah. So yeah.
Well.
So
now, if you could please tell me about your role in the city, and you've had couple different roles.
Yeah, I went
to each one.
From the library board experience led me to people for years asked me to think of if I wanted to run for city council and suggesting I should run, and I just thought, I always said, until Lauren, my younger daughter, was done with high school and I saw the whole show choir thing, I just wasn't even going to consider it. And then she did graduate, and I just, I needed to clean my house. I just go through all the piles and all that kind of thing. And I just took a couple of years off and still was working, but still just involved in a lot of volunteer things. And but then in 2012, a couple of the longtime council members were thinking about not running, and Dennis Kugel and Jeff Wiswell. And so someone called me in December of 2011 and said, hey, I just heard they're thinking about not running. You really ought to, so I know I tend to be someone who, big decisions like that, I will kind of just let them, I guess, percolate in my mind or something, and eventually I kind of come to a conclusion, and that's how that happened. And so I decided to go for it, and we ended up having 5 people running for 3 seats. The 2 of them then, after they had already turned in their papers in February, in the middle of the campaign, decided that they were going to drop out of the race. But of course, by then they were already on the ballot, so still had to campaign and spend a lot of time going door to door in Monona. I mean, most Saturdays and Sundays. And basically, what I did was when I used to do these literature distribution things, I had a group of like 21 different routes in Monona, so I would just take a different route each weekend day, and knock on doors, and I had a piece of literature printed up, and maybe a third of the people would answer the door, another third you could see peeking out at you behind the curtain, but they didn't, and then the rest went home. Talking to them, and if they weren't there, I'd leave a little sorry I missed you and then piece and leave it there. So I ran and I won, and then I was on the city council, and so I was on the council until 2017, so 5 years. And the first couple of years, Kathy Thomas was on the council with me. She'd been on for 30 years at that time, and then she decided to retire from the council. That was the first time. And then it was me and 5 men, and then in 2017, Bob Miller was our mayor, and when he was elected in 2015, he pretty much said from the get-go that he wasn't going to run again for another term. And so different people asked me, about running for mayor, and why don't you run? You do a good job, and that really, I spent a lot of time considering that, and I met with a lot of people, and because of the way Bob did it, I had a lot of time to think about it. So I met with him several times, just different people in the community, and finally decided, asked, trying to gauge support and that kind of thing. And so I decided to go for it, and I ran, and I had one opponent, and it was kind of a different sort of a race, and anyway, I won. So I've been mayor I was reelected this past April, so I've been mayor for a little over 2 years, and it's been quite an experience. I think it's everything I thought it would be. It takes an enormous amount of time, and I think part of that is probably depends on the person too. It's not like I have to go to every meeting, and I don't go to every meeting, but I'm sure if I was working full time, I wouldn't be nearly as involved on a day-to-day basis as I am.
Mm-hmm.
But I try to get to most things that are important. Not that everything isn't important, but that are kind of critical. And we've got a terrific staff that really keeps me informed of things. And then once I became mayor, one of the platforms I ran on was doing something about, we've got some city buildings that really need to have something done with them. They were built in the early 60s, and we're putting a fortune into them because all kinds of things are falling apart, and they're totally inadequate in terms of size and just what you can do, in the modern world here with, Wi-Fi and all wiring and all kinds of things. It's just, we just need to do something about the community center and the public safety part of City Hall in particular. So I appointed an ad hoc committee to reevaluate a study that the city had done back in 2011, but had kind of shelved and didn't do anything about. So we took another look at that and tried to get a variety of people from different parts of the community with this on the committee, and we hired a consultant to work with us, the same one who had actually developed the plan 10 years earlier. And so they've recommended replacing both the community center and building a separate public safety building. And those are things that are going to take a long time, but we needed to at least take the initial step and start some planning. So the first thing we're working on is the public safety building, and right now we're determining a site, and once we have that, then we'll get involved in it. We've got a very rudimentary plan. The architectural firm was a consultant, kind of a footprint, but no detail. But our public safety, what we provide in terms of facilities is some of the worst in Dane County. So we really need to up our game there. So yeah, that's the next big thing on the horizon. And then the other thing I did was appoint a bike pedestrian safety committee, and that's been somewhat contentious, but their basic goal of their charge is to establish safe bicycle and pedestrian corridors in Monona. So essentially what that means is look at the places people are going to the most in Monona, like the schools and the parks and whatever, and make sure that there's a safe route to get there. So sometimes that may mean sidewalks, it may mean different kinds of pavement marking. It's going to be a whole variety of things. They just issued their final report a couple of weeks ago, and the council hasn't even really evaluated the whole thing yet, but that hopefully will serve as a blueprint for how we're going to do some of our public works projects going forward. And that's, not everybody's going to be happy, but we have more and more young families moving into Monona. When Monona was built, there were really only 2 sets of sidewalks, I think, down Dean and down Nichols, and people just walk and bike and do a lot more outdoor stuff than they used to, and it's really dangerous in some areas of Monona to even taking a walk, so kids don't even ride their bikes or walk to school anymore, and a lot of that is because of their family, parents working or whatever, but some of that is because people just don't feel it's safe, so our hope is that over time it will become safer. So that's been kind of the 2 big focuses since I've been mayor. And then we've had our riverfront project down at the corner of Bridge Road and Broadway, which is the old Beltline. And that was in process. That's been going on the whole time I've been on city council. Bob Miller worked on assembling all the properties involved. I think there were 7 or 8 different properties that we pieced together to make up that parcel of land. And at the time he left, we had just settled on a developer. We went through a lot of different developers presenting plans, and either they backed out or we just didn't feel it was what we were looking for. So the last 2 years since I've been mayor have been spent pretty much working to implement their plan. They're doing the building, but there's an awful lot that the city does behind the scenes, and city staff has just spent a huge amount of time on this. And we don't have a very big city staff, but we've got this park that we're putting in down there, and our planner just spent huge amounts of time coordinating all the different pieces, and it's a huge project for Monona. It's going to be, the hope is worth about $40 million when it's done. It's probably the most complicated thing we've ever done. I would say, and part of it was brownfield, and so there's a lot going on down there, and people are going to start moving into the first phase of it in a couple weeks. So it's really fun to see that finally coming to fruition.
Exciting.
Yeah.
You mentioned both for city council and mayor, there were groups of people that were kind of trying to convince you to enter and saying it would be a good idea, but what is the reason you wanted to be involved?
I think because there were just a lot of things I had learned via my volunteer experience, especially with that library project. I had to work with the city quite a bit, both between that and finding all these new library directors. And it just interested me. I was interested in the process, and I felt I knew a lot about the city and had a lot to offer, and I guess I'd like to give my 2 cents, and that's, and I really, and once I got on the council, I really enjoy working on the policy part of it. And that's basically what the council is supposed to do, is set the policy, and then the mayor and the staff execute the policy. So it's really been interesting. People think there's always another side of the story, and there's always 5 other sides of the story. And you kind of, what you do is try to pick what you think is the best side, I guess, or the best route to go. And sometimes you put up with an awful lot of grief from people about it, and understanding that they have their own take on things, but they don't always know all the details of every project or proposal, or they're only looking at it from their own viewpoint and not from how it benefits the entire city, that kind of thing. So, I guess I just felt I had something to offer, and I had the time, and I retired in 2013, so that made it easier for me, and I knew it was going to be a big time commitment. I probably spent on average about 30 hours a week on the mayoral position. Wow. And it's not like every single day, but most days I'm at least a few hours. I'm on the computer responding to emails, or I make a lot of notes of different meetings I have just so I can keep it all straight, and just going over things, preparing for upcoming events and meetings. I get asked to speak at various events, so putting together, some comments for whatever that involves. And it's a lot of put in a lot of time.
Yeah.
And it's so, you know, I think sometimes people think that we just willy-nilly make these decisions without any thought, and that really, I am certainly willing to agree that maybe we haven't always thought of everything, and we're always, you know, certainly open to hearing, but about things we might not have considered or whatever. But it's not that nobody cares and just goes in one day and decides to make this major change and just does it and doesn't care what anybody thinks, because that isn't really what happens. So.
Did you have much interaction or knowledge of the previous mayors, especially prior to city council? So as like a resident of Monona, and there's a mayor of Monona, did you have much interaction or follow what they were doing or anything like that?
Yeah, a couple of them. I think there have been maybe 5 mayors, 5 or 6 since we moved here. We moved here, a man named Bob Olson was the mayor, and he happened to live right behind us. But before that, Dean Bowles had been the mayor. And we knew Dean because Bob is a librarian, but he was the technology consultant for the Department of Public Instruction's Division for Library Services. And Dean, at that point, was the assistant superintendent who probably pretty much ran the day-to-day operation of DPI. And so we knew him before we even moved here, and his wife was very involved in the Friends of the Library. So for instance, when we set up the referendum campaign, Dean came and met with us, and he had done a lot of referendum campaigns for schools all over the state, because he's also an education professor at UW, and did a lot of consulting. And he basically told us the step-by-step process of how to run a referendum, and that is a campaign, and that is still how I run any campaign that I do, basically, you know. So we knew Dean, and then I knew of Dick Litchfield at the time. I've since gotten to know him. And then Tom Metcalf, I got to know pretty well because he was the mayor when we did the library project, and he gave a huge donation to the library project, and so I got to know him really well over the time we were planning all of that. And in fact, at one point, he and John DeBacher and I went down to the merchandise mart in Chicago and spent a day going, and I'd never even been in the merchandise mart, going to all these various furniture businesses and sitting in chairs, looking for comfortable chairs to buy for the library. And a lot of those chairs you now see along the windows. So those are the comfortable seating spaces, you know. So yeah, I knew Tom pretty well, and Rob I knew pretty well because by that point, both Tom and Rob I was the president of the library board. So we had to meet with them to present the library budget, and when library directors left or whatever, you know, I was involved with them. And then Bob Miller actually was a personal friend before he even became mayor, involved in politics. He was part of he wasn't really in the neighborhood, but he got to be good friends with some of our neighbors, and he and Pam kind of became honorary members of the Arrowhead Park neighborhood. And his wife Pam actually preceded me as president of MG Sings at the high school. Our kids were the same age, and they were very involved in the music program too. It's all very intertwined in Monona. So yeah, I knew Bob really well.
And what has been some of the biggest challenges during your time with the city?
I think money is a huge challenge because Monona, I think a lot of people don't realize how cities are financed, but basically you have 2 budgets, the operating budget and the capital budget. And the capital budget is what we use for buying major pieces of equipment, like street plows and police cars and that kind of thing, and doing building projects. That's all borrowed, and there aren't really limits on how much we could borrow. Well, there are limits on how much we can borrow, but there's also our own limits because we don't want to get ourselves too indebted. But the state has limitations on it's a certain percentage of the value of your property, total property of the city or whatever. But then there's the operating budget, which actually funds everybody's salaries and pays for the heat and the health insurance and everything. And that's where there are state budget constraints, and we can only increase taxes for that part of the budget so much. So every year we have, since I've been involved in the council, we have had maybe $100,000 in new money that we know we'll have available for hiring new police officers or anything else. Well, a new police officer can cost $80,000 to $90,000. So, or giving staff raises. I mean, it's really, it really ties us down. Really, in terms of what we'd like to do. We knew that we needed another police officer. We've needed more staff in the parks. We've needed library staff. Public Works needed somebody, because we've got like 5 guys in Public Works who do all the work for the city. I mean, that's plowing, that's all the patching the roads. There's just all kinds of things they do. And so the only reason we added a couple new people last year, and that is because our our major tax incremental financing district, which is Pier 37, finally closed, and that meant that all the additional taxes that is generated is now money that we have available to spend. Up until then, it was all going to pay off the infrastructure costs for doing that development. It took 27 years, and the same thing's going to happen at the riverfront. So the only way we can really increase our budget more than the complicated state formula, it's based on how much all your property, the value of your new construction. But Monona's surrounded by Madison. It's not like we have all these cornfields like they have out in Verona that we could just throw up a bunch of big box stores, So everything we do to try to increase our tax base is redevelopment, and redevelopment is always complicated. It's usually it involves some kind of a brownfield site. Down at the riverfront, there used to be a dry cleaner there years ago, and a friend of mine who worked for the DNR told me once that anytime you hear there's been a dry cleaner on a site, you're going to have problems, because she said literally in the old days, at the end of the day, they used to open the back door and throw all the chemicals that they used to use just out on the field behind the building, and that stuff is all seeped into the groundwater and everything else, and so there's always cleanup. And the same thing with gas stations or whatever. Right. So that's part of the reason we end up in this tax incremental financing, where the city has to borrow a certain amount of money, because we have to lots of times do the cleanup in order to entice these developers to come in. But if we didn't do that, we wouldn't have anybody developing anything in Monona. We'd just be cutting and providing fewer and fewer services, because we wouldn't have the money to pay for it. So that's kind of a short lesson in municipal finance, but that's
big challenge.
It's a big challenge, yeah, and we want to pay people decent salaries. I mean, we try to at least be in the middle of the pack for Dane County, and of course we're competing with Madison and Middleton and Verona and these communities that just have a lot more money than we do. So we try to be really smart, and I'm sure there's things that people think we're not so smart about, but sometimes we try things and they don't work, and okay, now we've learned that,
Right.
So yeah, that's probably been my biggest challenge.
Okay.
There's been individual things that people get upset about, but I like to think I have an open door policy, and I've met with all kinds of people. I don't really have an office, so I've even learned to like coffee. Spent a lot of time in coffee shops meeting with people and hearing them out, and sometimes I can do something about it, what they're concerned about, and other times I can't, but at least I try to explain our side of the story and our rationale for what we're doing. So
on the flip side, even though I know your time with the city isn't done yet, what so far has been your biggest accomplishment? It could be both, of course, as mayor or city council, or really, I guess.
Yeah,
I consider your time on the board as a role in the city. So
yeah, I guess that's certainly, if not the biggest, but one of my biggest accomplishments to date has been this library expansion and renovation. That was just a huge thing, and it was so exciting to watch, and I think Monona has really benefited from it. So that was definitely a biggie. I think getting the riverfront finally to the phase where it's going to be opening now has probably been the biggest thing. Probably both when I was on the council and as mayor, although you're kind of seeing different parts of it. And if I can get at least something started with a public safety building, that would be awesome. Mm-hmm. But that's going to be a real challenge. Right now I'm trying to cut down on the amount of capital borrowing we're doing, because of course it's not going to be cheap to build a public safety building, but we just can't. For years that our taxes have been going up in a lot of cases because of building projects that the schools are doing, and they need you know, they needed those projects too, but we can't just keep putting off city stuff to the point, you know, now we're having things like at the community center a year or two ago, we started having all these issues with, I can't remember, the sink leaking or toilets leaking. Well, then you find out the entire floor underneath is rotted out, and we spend a fortune fixing that kind of stuff because we have to fix it, but it's part of it is just because everything is so old and heavily used, and so that's going to be the big challenge, and I'm hoping that's something that I'm really happy is on its way to being done by the time I leave, because I do not plan on being here forever.
Yeah.
So
Okay. And how have your perceptions of Monona changed, and like how the perception of the needs of the community have changed since your time working with the city?
I think Monona has become, for one thing, as we all know, the housing has gotten really expensive here, and that's kind of another challenge in that we want to bring young families here, but a lot of them just can't afford to come here right now. The housing prices are going up so high, and of course that's happening all over Dane County. I think there's more and more of a need for affordable housing here in Monona, and affordable housing isn't what you think of necessarily as low income housing. I mean, people like teachers need affordable housing. It's because when you're making, 40, or single mom making $40,000 a year or something, it's hard to even find an apartment to rent that you can afford, so, and I don't know what we can do about that. That's one of these things that, given that any kind of development we do almost has to involve TIF for the city to be able to do it, and when you have TIF, you have to be able to generate enough taxes to pay off what you borrow for the TIF. So that just by itself involves higher end developments, and it's tough. But I think that's something that's become more and more of an issue in Monona, is the need for affordable housing. It just help for lower income people, and I know Winnetka School, they have a fairly large percentage of free hot lunch families, and that, which is kind of a determinant, of community need, I'd say. So yeah, I think there's a lot of needs out there that people aren't necessarily aware of.
Mm-hmm.
But that's probably been one big thing. But Monona it's just really changed a lot in terms of the people who live here, and been a lot of turnover, a lot of younger families moving in and who want different things and have different priorities,
Right.
I think. And so we're trying to meet those while still providing for our seniors, but I think overall we've got a pretty good balance. We have a great senior center too, and so we're trying to do it all within these parameters of not having much money. So
What would you want to tell the people of Monona?
well, I guess that, and I'm sure they already know this, that Monona is just a great place to live, and I think I hope that they're willing to make the investment to help it continue to be an attractive place for people to live. I think it has all kinds of, it has all the benefits of a small town, but it's surrounded by the city of Madison, so we get to take advantage of everything Madison has to offer. And so I hope people, continue to be willing to support what it takes to keep what we've got going on here and helping us provide the amenities and the services that we do, and so that we can continue to attract people to come here.
All right, well, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And you will be able to hear yourself as well as the others up shortly.